Okay, thank you, Bill. Okay, it's 7:01 p.m. and I'm calling the April 29th Joint Planning Board Select Board meeting to order. This is a remote meeting, so I will have to take roll call, and I know for the record it is being recorded by HWCAM. So planning board members, when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton?
Present.
Jonathan Poor?
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton?
Aye.
Emil Dahlquist?
Emil Dahlquist present.
Beth Herr?
Present.
Darcy Dale?
Darcy Dale, present.
Matt Hamill?
Present.
Jeff Austin?
Jeff Austin present.
And Marnie Crouch, present.
Okay, this is Bill Olson. I will call the select board portion of the meeting to order, and I will do a roll call vote. I apologize, I have my camera off for a few minutes longer as I'm in the car, but I will start with myself, Bill Olson. Here, I will go next to Bill Wilson,
Bill Wilson here.
Rosemary Kennedy,
Rosie Kennedy here.
Tom Myers,
Tom Myers here.
and Ben Galuzza.
Ben Galuzza here.
All right, Marnie, I'll turn this back over to you.
Right. Do we have Matt or Zoe here from?
Matt.
Matt is here from
Both here.
UTL.
Yes.
And Zoe's here.
Great.
Yep, also present.
I would have to ask the select board members whether they had the opportunity to review the materials, the revised materials that UTL has prepared. In particular, they have prepared proposed amendments to the existing zoning bylaw, as well as a second draft of the Hamilton Town Center based zoning, and finally, a second draft of 3A multifamily overlay district. And I did at the outset have one question. I noted that the 3A regulations that were recently finalized by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities contains, I think, only one real substantive change to the emergency regulations, and that is a provision in the definition of excluded land, which enables a town to use land owned by an educational or religious institution if that land is no longer being used for those purposes. And I bring that to everyone's attention because it raises the possibility that the 208 apartments at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary could potentially form the basis of another 3A overlay district, thereby taking some of the pressure off the downtown area in terms of both acreage and the number of housing units.
Marnie, can I suggest that we start the meeting with the summary of the goals and the agenda? I think it'd be helpful to frame out the conversation. If we all got on the same page, it's going to be difficult, I think, to expect a joint review of a 25-page document with everyone on the phone. But what is the desired outcome, I guess, for tonight's meeting?
Well, I agree with you, Pat. I want Zoe and Matt to summarize what's going on, but I think that's an important change that has only recently come to everyone's attention. So Matt or Zoe, perhaps you could lead the way and help the select board and the planning board understand where we are at the present moment.
Okay, I'm happy to. I will share my screen. Is everyone seeing that?
No.
No.
Yes.
No.
Now I am.
All right, good. So
Yeah.
I will as Pat noted, there's obviously a lot to go over and there's a lot of details. I think what's probably the best way to proceed with this meeting is for us to sort of summarize what we think the sort of significant edits were over the first draft. We'll back up a little bit just to give very quick overview of how things are structured. And then give you all a quick summary of where we think the sort of critical changes have been. And then there are a few sort of maybe larger important questions that we felt we wanted to address, so we can address those. But all to say that we can come back to the Gordon Conwell question, when we get into our discussion. Okay, I'll first talk a little bit about where we are in our process. I'm just going to minimize something here so that I can see the screen. You might recall we resumed in February, and with the help of a nimble task force, sort of worked through prioritizing what we wanted the zoning to accomplish and how to meet the best needs of the downtown area while checking the box, as it were, on 3A compliance. We issued a first draft code a couple of weeks ago. Last week we issued a second draft. We're anticipating, we're working backwards from a town vote on June 26th. And we have a target date of June 5th for a kind of final warrant.
What are the public hearing requirements? What are the public hearing dates?
So this slide shows what we're planning here, which is that we're discussing today, April 9th, the revised code. And by May 20th or earlier, we will have a code that incorporates more comments. And then again, this doesn't have to go into warrant until June 5th is what we're recommending. There is room between May 20th and June 5th for sort of tweaks and other things like that. But the goal is to be substantially complete by May 20th.
It's my understanding that the planning board would have to issue a notice with respect to the various proposed amendments to our zoning bylaw and this new town center code on May 5th, and we would have to have our public hearing on May 20th. Mark, would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, that's correct. We need a minimum of 2 weeks.
2 weeks before the hearing.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So is the notice 2 weeks before the hearing include the draft? Or is it just a notice for the hearing?
The notice provides people a link where they can review the materials, and it's just a short description of what the zoning would do that we have to publish in the newspaper, mail to the abutting towns, and a couple other procedural things.
Okay. So it's just a notice, and I presume that obviously the town will take care of that. So that would be 2 weeks prior to May 20th. Okay, I'll proceed. I just want to pull back. We've been looking at this for a while, but sometimes it's useful, and particularly maybe for some of the select board that haven't been following every single move. Big picture, we have two areas in which we are making new additions to the code. There's the new base zoning for the town center. And that includes 5 sub-districts. This is new base zoning, so it would replace the underlying zoning. And then we have an overlay, which is intended really mostly to meet any outstanding capacity requirements that are required by 3A. 3 of the town center districts, Bay Road mixed use, Willow Street mixed use, and downtown residential, in combination with the 3A multifamily overlay district, those sort of 4 items together meet the compliance requirements in terms of density, acreage, and unit counts. The Depot Square mixed use, which is sort of the most commercial of the districts, and the Bay Road Civic, which is a single parcel sort of district, if you will, are outside of the requirements of 3A. This is the map that is currently proposed, depicting where the districts are. You'll see color-coded corresponding to where the districts are. We have downtown residential, Willow Street mixed use, Bay Road mixed use, Bay Road Civic. Again, that's 1 or 2 parcels owned by the town. And then the Depot Square mixed use, which is the most commercial of the district. You'll also see this this darker black outline. That's indicating the sub-districts that will be contributing to the 3A requirements. And then the second district is an overlay on Asbury Street. It consists of really 2 parcels, one of which already has a 23-unit sort of condominium development. The other, I understand, was recently permitted for, we believe, either 68 or 69, I'm sorry, 46 units through 3A. And so these 2 parcels are mostly either sort of developed or will about to be developed, but together they comprise about 19 acres and are probably not likely to be redeveloped.
Just to clarify, that's 45 units, and it's
45, okay.
40B project, affordable housing project.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
been previously approved, and our understanding is they anticipate starting construction this year.
Okay. So we will correct the data here. Okay, summary of the changes that we made in draft 2. First of all, I want to thank all the members of the planning board that really went through the document in some detail and made very useful comments. We have, in most cases, responded to those or made those sorts of recommended changes. There are 3 sort of areas of change. The first is changes to your underlying bylaw, mostly triggered by the addition of these new districts. We've taken the use table that had previously been sort of separated out into the new town center district. We've put it back where it was and simply added new columns with the new sub-districts and sort of built off of the existing use table, adding a couple of uses in there, mainly multifamily residential. We, upon a very good recommendation, I think, deleted the Willow Street overlay, which was really has been sort of superseded by this zoning. The senior housing provisions now really just apply to the R districts because multifamily housing is now allowed in the town center. The business district, as you currently have it, has been completely replaced by the new district. So we've sort of combed through the document to make sure that that was erased or adjusted accordingly. And then the important but minor thing is the definition of floor area ratio was refined to align with changes that had happened in your definition of gross floor area at your last town meeting. The town center-based zoning, we've incorporated a reference to a vision plan. So we will have a document that reflects all the sort of planning that went into this process that can be used as a reference for reviewing projects. In addition, we've again recommended pre-application conferences to promote a better understanding of the intent of the zoning. And in terms of the interpretation, some of the sections, the lot building and dimensions and the use table, we have made a number of sort of small edits, both in terms of the language, some additional imagery to clarify what those things are. And then we've added a pretty significant amount of site development standards. So controls for smaller parking areas, guidance on landscaping in front yards, tree planting requirements, specificity about how curb cuts are treated, and some guidance on lighting. And in the 3A multifamily overlay district, we've added, at your recommendation, the sunset clause, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. And then added a few design standards, mainly with regard to maximum building size and roof forms and materials. Okay, I would like to, again, everyone's probably got a lot of things on their agenda, things that they want to discuss. We would just like to sort of start big first with some items that have come up that we thought warranted a fuller discussion with the larger group here. One is sort of a discussion about confirming what we want to do on Carriage Lane, which is a kind of unique condition. We want to discuss or clarify what the special permit threshold would be in the Depot Square downtown district. And then before we forget about it, we do want to talk about the sunset clause. So the carriage lane is currently in the zoning as written. It's in the Bay Road mixed use district. Its dimensional requirements are the same. The development patterns in there, the depths of the front yards are actually quite consistent with those that are actually on Bay Road. But there's been a question about whether to allow the mixed use component. In other words, do we also allow commercial uses in that carriage lane district? And so we'd like to, at least for discussions purposes, float a few alternatives. One is that it simply stays in the Bay Road mixed use district with the same parameters dimensionally, but to simply disallow commercial uses on those parcels that don't actually front Bay Road. That's a fairly simple change, either a note to the use table or other. The second alternative is to change carriage lane to the downtown residential district. That comes with a slightly finer grain in terms of the dimensional parameters, slightly shallower front setbacks. It also sort of automatically comes with sort of not allowing, for the most part, mixed use, except sort of smaller accessory uses. And then the third alternative is maybe the most extreme, which is removing it entirely and finding additional acreage to satisfy the 3A requirements somewhere else. And that could be either by expanding the downtown residential district or by expanding the the 3A multifamily overlay district near Asbury. And I can sort of cycle through what these look like. So this is Carriage Lane Alternative 1. There's no change in the map, except we control for, we disallow the mixed use or the commercial component within the carriage lane parcels that are not fronting on Bay Road. So approximately this area. The second alternative is to simply put those parcels, and I believe there's probably only 4, in the downtown residential district. This would come with, again, probably a perfectly nice, maybe finer grain, slightly smaller setbacks. That would also come with a more restrictive, more residential leaning set of uses. And then the third piece is third idea maybe is to remove it altogether. And to, that would require us to do one of 2 things, is we would need to get some acreage back. So there's a approximately 49 acre minimum requirement for our district. We are just barely there. And so even if we remove, this is maybe a couple of acres down there, we have to find somewhere else to put it. So this is one way to do it, is that you would fill in a little bit in this area between Hamilton and Mill Street, further back from Willow Street. And then, where else would we find area to add? It might be in the 3A multifamily overlay district. This is maybe a little more complicated because the district would, in order to meet contiguity standards, would need to include a single family dwelling parcel that's across Asbury Street to get to this larger parcel, which is behind. So I might sort of pause there. This might be a good place to have a discussion or answer any comments.
Before we open that up, Matt, could I just offer just a clarification point that might help folks put this into context, which is maybe you could discuss a little bit what triggers this code. That it isn't anything that suddenly changes the character of the lot. It's when there's redevelopment. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And it's also one of the suggestions that I had, made a suggestion to clarify that in the actual code, what triggers this zoning.
Could I just add that, Jonathan, that's an excellent point, and it's also one that I believe has to be addressed within the existing code.
Yeah,
There
yes,
has
that's
to
what I was
be.
indicating. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think it's like any zoning change where existing uses are essentially grandfathered in. There's no sort of immediate non-compliance or obligation to change. Virtually all of this downtown residential neighborhood is out of compliance with your current R1A zoning. And so there isn't really a trigger unless someone wanted to completely redevelop their parcel.
It might also be helpful to give some context to the lots that are being proposed to be included in the zoning district there, that they're half-acre lots. And by applying the math that you have for that district, you'd be allowing a by right development of about a 10,000 square foot building on those half-acre lots.
Are you doing the math on the floor area ratio?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a big
just-
building.
It's just to give it context that, that's a residential area that's connected to other residential areas, and it would be quite a big difference to develop it that way.
Matthew, do you want to, I know we can't really do the math quite live for each of those parcels, but we do also carry a building footprint requirement. So FAR is not the only element that's controlling for the amount of building area that's possible.
Yeah, there's a maximum building footprint size, but the new zoning would permit more than one building on a parcel, provided obviously it met the other requirements like setbacks and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that comment made no sense to me because there's no way you could do that given the code that, whether you use all of these existing parcels as they are, or whether you combine them all, you can't get that type of construction you're just talking about. I thought the question we're going to talk about is what is the best use of that particular site? Let it remain strictly residential in form or go mixed use. But you're saying now that you think taking any commercial out of that would be alternative number one. So it is an odd, just based on its location, it seems to me to have a more relevancy to what's going on around it, in the on the Bay Road mixed use. And it's also part of the main thrust, I thought, in all of this was to look for where to place the activity. And the idea was to keep a lot of the commercial busy activity off Bay Road, allow that to be a scenic, more historic kind of road. And then all the side streets off that, like Railroad, like perhaps Cummings Ave, Carriage Lane, and a little bit of Walnut down there would be the active areas where you would look for a little bit more commercial, a little bit more density than what's currently existing. So the idea was to not have the economic activity focus strictly on Bay Road, but the side streets. That made a lot of sense, and including Asbury, up in that end of the town center. So I would be in favor of just keeping it as a mixed use zone. And
I think
it could be developed all residential, like a dense residential to fit any other residential section in the downtown, or it could be commercial, depending on the interest for development.
Yeah, right. I agree. Keep it flexible and not turn into a pretzel. I feel like we're trying to do too much in one little area. Seems to make sense to keep it flexible and adaptable, especially because you have natural boundaries of the public safety building and the
Right.
MBTA track.
Yeah, it seems like a natural thing to do, actually, from a land standpoint. But
Well,
Do any
it's
other
yeah.
planning
ahead,
board
Zoe.
members or anybody else have any comments on that?
My brief comment would just be I support what Emil just said, and I would be opposed to creating kind of an island of unrelated uses. So I would propose that it have more consistency and cohesiveness, which means keep the mixed use. So it's basically option one.
Anybody on the select board opposed to option one?
No. Makes sense.
I think
You want
just to
some kind of
clarify,
motion here?
well, option one, just to be clear,
yeah.
option one did not allow any commercial on Carriage Lane. Is that correct?
Oh, so sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, anybody
Yeah.
opposed to keeping it as mixed use?
That's option two, right?
So basically, just to clarify, so there's as is, so as it's written right now, that includes mixed use, allowing mixed use for the entirety of Carriage Lane. And then what we're presenting to you is a series of alternatives in response to some feedback at a prior meeting, asking us to consider ways to remove a portion of Carriage Lane from the mixed use rules. So these are alternatives
right.
for that, but that doesn't mean we need to pursue any of those alternatives. We can keep it with the base as is, which does allow for the full mixed use.
Just to caution, the one thing I think you need to do is take a look at the setbacks because those are relatively small lots compared to everything else on Bay Road. And if you look at what is left on that site, you know, going through the setbacks and going through the, you know, front yard, side yard and so forth, and do the math, it's going to be really very limiting. But because they're very shallow lots, that's my point, as compared to everything south of that along Bay Road, which I think has a lot more potential for development. But that's the only thing just to check on your metrics in the charts in the matrix.
So I stand corrected. My intention was to support leaving the original proposed code as it's drafted.
Yeah.
And that's what I meant too. I meant the current option, not the opposite. So the current option is what I'm doing here. And I'm asking anybody the select board has an issue with the current.
So I draw the conclusion from the silence that we should leave it as it presently stands.
Do you want to have a motion to that effect?
If you'd like to make one.
I would make a motion that we leave any rezoning of the Carriage Lane area intact to its current.
Second.
Well, I'll have to take a roll call vote. So when I call your name, please indicate your vote.
Sorry, intact to its current, meaning current zoning or current proposed, I guess.
Current proposed. It will
Current
be
proposed.
Current proposed.
Bay Road mixed use.
I think Bill said actually the current zoning. So can we just go back over what's different between the current zoning and what we're proposing? I just feel
Not the current, not the current zoning, the current proposal. So
The
the
current
current
proposed
option.
zone.
okay.
The current
Well,
option.
okay, that wasn't what I heard the motion as, so that's why I was. And so is there some kind of notice that goes out to the Carriage Lane people to let them know that it's changing? And if they have any feedback on change
That
since
would
they
be,
live there?
that would be the public notice that goes out to the entire community.
So they don't get a special notice because they're within that zone, like an abutters notice or anything.
There's no requirement to do that. I mean, certainly the town can, you know, take additional measures if it wants, but there's no state requirement to do that.
If there are only four parcels, I think it would be
Right.
it would be smart. It would be considerate to give those people notice, and so that if they object and wanted to speak out against this at town meeting, they would have that opportunity. They would be well informed. So we'll go forward with the vote. Pat Norton,
Vote no.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
And with Alquistine,
Beth Herr,
No.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, no.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So a majority of the planning board has voted to keep the current proposed Bay Road mixed-use zoning on Carriage Lane. But I will add that I think it's appropriate to give those property owners on Carriage Lane specific notice of this proposed zoning.
Thank you, Marnie.
You're welcome. Matt, do you want to go forward?
Sure. Okay, the other thing we want to talk about, because it was maybe a source of confusion, is the permit threshold between by right and special permit in the Depot Square district. The code and the metrics were built upon some of that nice existing fabric that you see on Railroad Avenue. You know, closely knit, small shops facing the front in a nice sort of walkable district. That became, in a sense, the building block. And the intention was to build upon that fabric dimensionally in terms of character, and sort of having the zoning allow for that to spread to larger parcels. This is a kind of planning diagram that illustrates some of the planning principles that we discussed as informing the zoning. And so you can see in the large shopping center site, the idea is to, rather than have large parking areas fronting the road, to actually have new appropriately scaled development along the edges to promote a kind of nicer pedestrian friendly sort of shopping experience. There was an idea to maintain some connectivity, at least visually, through Railroad Ave into the site, and as well as allow for some future potential connection to the greenway in the rail right of way. This is a kind of image of how that might look. You're seeing, again, Railroad Avenue type of density and development along the perimeter, and then allowing for larger shopping center deeper and in the middle of the site, similar to what's there now. The site is too large to simply put as a right zoning at it. We do need to allow something. And so the way the zoning is written now is that by right development is, of this scale, is permitted for the first sort of 80 feet of the development. And then anything behind the 80 feet of frontage would have to go through a special permit. This is a kind of zoom in of what that Depot Square mixed use district looks like. You'll see it includes the shopping center, and it goes up the 2 blocks that span Railroad Ave. When we apply this sort of 80-foot rule to the entire district, what this really means is generally the by right development, again, subject to all of our setbacks, height, scale, maximum building footprint, all those things. The by right piece would only be applicable to the first 80 feet from the frontage of the property. And this is generally what that looks like if you apply that rule set to these 3 major areas. Larger development that wanted to occupy larger sort of rear portions of these parcels would have to go through special permit. That's how we have it set up now. And I think what I wanted to gauge was 2 things, is whether that's clear to everyone. And the second is that an appropriate level of threshold for special permit, or should we be putting in something that might want to be stricter? For instance, we could limit a total amount of development on any parcel to some square footage, and say that more is allowed but with a special permit, right? And so we could, in a sense, capture projects by special permit even at a smaller scale. But there's a number of ways that we can sort of set that dial, but it's something that I felt has been a little bit maybe not clear to everyone, but B, I felt was important to get some sort of confirmation that we're approaching this the right way.
So the way this is being approached, if we think about the shopping center for a minute, nothing would preclude expanding development along the Walnut Street train track frontage and keeping the existing shopping center there because that's a grandfathered use?
Correct.
Not that there would be enough parking or that it would work,
The-
but the point is it would still create an awful lot of development on that particular parcel.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to the feasibility is certainly an important question, but yes.
Right.
I mean,
Now
they
this
could
is
redo the whole site, but if they wanted to essentially add to the site, they could do it.
yes. Again, subject to setbacks, building footprint limitations, and all the design criteria that we put in. So it's not like a building that would literally occupy this area in blue, right? Ideally, I think when we apply the rules, it probably ends up more like this.
Can I make a comment on that, Matthew?
Yeah.
I did a test run on using your code on the frontage on Walnut, and there seems to be a conflict. You're asking for a 30-foot separation between buildings throughout the whole depot district, and that would also include railroad. So if you were to reconfigure railroad in the event there were damage done there, and you try to recreate it, you're still asking for 30 feet per building, which isn't true for a lot of those buildings right there now. But the other issue, by using that 30 along Walnut, you're also applying another metric for percentage occupation along the frontage. In other words, you take a distance from the corner at Bay to the opposite corner on the east, it's 343 feet. And you got a park in the corner there that's about 100 feet. And they've got two driveways going in that should be probably 35, 40 feet apart. You're not going to reach the 60% that you're looking for in the metrics.
Right.
So I'm seeing a little bit of conflict there in terms of how you're putting using the metrics and putting it all together. I think the 80-foot deep is interesting because of what it forces you to do, given a building size that you're allowing 5,000 square feet as a footprint. So
Yes.
it kind of forces a particular kind of configuration there. You can build smaller, but I'm wondering, builders generally don't like to build smaller. They like to build larger. I'm just wondering if should kind of reconsider that 30-foot separation.
Yeah. But that's a fair point and a good catch. In my mind it was less, but there's a lot of numbers
It
in
may
this
have been a
document.
typo, but
Yeah. I will go review that. I think that's a good catch. Thank you. And I agree, it could be more like 20, or even 15 or 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And I think that's the configuration. If you're looking to replicate railroad, be more like the railroad configuration. I think the 80-foot deep is an interesting idea, and everything beyond that is special permit. I just to bring it up again, I've heard a lot of comments objecting to the building along the rail line, sort of internal in that site. And I don't know whether you keep coming back with it, whether that's really a strong thing to do from your standpoint as a town planner.
It goes back to this diagram
Yeah,
that we worked on,
right.
which is to encourage a certain amount of pedestrian frontage, right? That this is a weird situation where we have rail frontage,
Yeah.
but not a street. And yet it's completely visible. It's not a back of house rail. It's a rail line that goes right through the middle of town.
Yeah.
And so we saw this as part of a sort of a continuous and interesting series of pedestrian accessible frontages, or at least accessible sort of points.
Yeah.
You think about the visibility from Railroad Ave, the visibility across this way, and I don't think that these edges want to be backs.
No.
And so we've characterized this edge in particular in the code as a frontage and not a side yard.
Right. So you have frontages on two sides then, on the parking side and on the rail side.
Yes.
So I've been also questioning that, but in your explanation today, Matt, I think you've convinced me otherwise, because I would agree with you that when you're on Bay Road, you do see that area, and right now it's visually confusing, and this would actually organize it and draw people into that development. So I've changed my tune with your presentation tonight, your words tonight.
I would also like a little bit of help here, because I understand the 80-foot metric. I also think that we might phrase this in the alternative with a reference to the amount of square footage on the site. So requiring a special permit if one of two conditions were to be met. And then the other reason it would be important to have a special permit, I think, in this area is because if you were to have development along the railroad tracks in this area of the Crosby's Marketplace, that you would have to have buildings with two frontage, because you would want to have access both from the railroad track pedestrian walkway and from the parking lot. So both sides of the buildings would have to be visually attractive. And that, of course, it would be more expensive for a developer than to just have one side and not have to worry about the utilities and the other aspects of a building that are normally in the rear.
Let me
What is-
continue with that line of thought, which is the note here: treat rail as frontage. Frontage on a rail line is not the same as frontage on a street. I'm sure there's some kind of state law that requires fencing to separate the rail line from any area where there's active pedestrians. Maybe not.
Yes, I would think so. You would want it in any of it.
and you know, the notion that people are going to walk on this little strip of land that provides them rail frontage, even though nobody's ever going to go from the train into those stores, or not many people are. They're all going to come from the parking lot in. It's just kind of looks nice, but I wonder whether it's actually going to work to treat a rail line as frontage.
Well, Bill, I think there is a railing there, and I think that, and there is a path that goes right to the train station. I think the thinking was that would be an access to the train station without going through the development there at Hamilton Crossing.
How is it currently defined? How is it currently defined? What is the frontage currently dictated by, or the setback?
Do you mean under the current zoning?
Correct. Yes. What is it? How does it currently sit?
I don't know what the current zoning would require on that edge.
0 feet, according to as a rear yard setback on Depot Square, 0 feet.
There's a chance it would be interpreted as a side.
Yeah. Side yard is 0 feet and front is 0 to 10. So that would have to change, I guess, somehow.
I think these are all good questions. Yeah, the mechanics of having two fronts are very difficult. Retailers don't tend to appreciate it. And the reality is that there's probably, if we do have retail here, there's probably one main entry. I think the intent was that edge shouldn't be just relegated to back a house, that it's very visible. You can, this image is depicting access points. If you were to walk down Railroad Ave, you walk parallel to the station, you could pop in, or these could be outdoor areas for seating or what have you. I think the intention was that the guidance that we're providing for frontage, which is driven, a little bit about shaping the overall sort of urban form here, should apply to that edge. I'll say that we're not requiring entries on that edge, or other sorts of things, but I think, again, the intent is that this should feel like an attractive, friendly edge.
I just say that's sort of what it is right now today, and people do walk down it if they're commuting. I'm one of those people, so I use it every now and then.
I think if you all can imagine some of the, historic rail stations that, like Hamilton's, have this sort of relationship to the existing fabric, there's also an opportunity to have, you still retain that fence, but you have that visual permeability. You can see that there's something enticing on the other side, and there is limited access to get to it. There is a small fence barrier, but that behind that you could have nicely landscaped area, and you could access those businesses in a way that, if they weren't arranged in that location, they might not catch your eye as you're moving to and from the station. So I think that's, there's certainly, specific safety rules that would need to be addressed as part of that. But I think if you look amongst the MBTA like commuter rail network, I, for instance, went to Concord Academy, went to high school, using the commuter rail, and there's several instances where there's that kind of relationship along the track. So I think it's not unprecedented. It would require some level of finesse, but I think there's value to be gained from it.
I have a question about a practical question. Where would you put things like dumpsters and bicycle racks? I mean, is that something that would be an eyesore? Would you be able to make them look better or hide them somehow?
That was what I was getting at, Darcy, because if you want the front to be on the rail line, you would also want a front on the parking lot side as well. So yes, where would the dumpsters go? Where would the air conditioning units and all that kind of stuff? They're very unattractive. So that's why I said a special permit would almost have to be required to make sure that visually this plan actually worked, because without some fairly stringent oversight, it could unravel pretty quickly and you could have a mess.
Yeah, we do have, requirements for screening those things in the base zoning. And I agree the best way to resolve it is through design and a special permit process. It's certainly possible, right? These are not enormous buildings, and there's ways through design to put trash in the right place, to screen it, to work through the functionality. Again, this is a pretty picture. This doesn't have the benefit of working with a real developer or a retailer, but with a reasonable amount of attention to design, those things can be, through decent design decisions and a little bit of craft, they can be concealed properly, I think.
Matt, this is Mark. I think it sounds nice, but practically there'd be some questions about how you enforce it. Like if you're building 81 feet past the frontage, would that then trigger the special permit? Or if your parking was behind the 80 feet, when does that affect whether or not you're a special permit by right? So we just have to make sure that language is pretty tight, because I'm sure we'd confront these situations.
Yeah, I think our intention is, yes, the parking would be allowed behind there. But I think, it's like any dimensional standard. There's a trigger. I mean, I'm curious, Marnie, you mentioned that you thought 80 feet is a good one potential trigger condition, and that we might also add a second one. Were you thinking it's the total size of the development as a kind of threshold, or were there other sort of
Well,
metrics
what
that
you mentioned, it might be the total size of the building, because to make it work, those buildings really would have to be of the same scale as the buildings on Railroad Avenue. So it's the kind of site that would have to be handled delicately. And so I think that another trigger could be just some measure of scale, because you couldn't have so much development there that the parking would be obliterated. You
Which is
have
what
to,
it looks like now, given the amount of building mass with that interior.
right,
space.
right,
There's
right.
nowhere near enough parking.
Yeah, you're actually reducing what's there significantly.
Right. And there are times when the parking lot there at Crosby's Marketplace is pretty full. And the parking for employees is obliterated in this diagram. Because
Yeah.
right now, I believe the employees park across from the side of the CVS.
Another
So-
interesting aspect of the size of the development, not just the building itself, but the size of development may trigger some concern or maybe even opportunity to combine infrastructure as it relates to, how you condition these things, how you handle the waste and all the other
Right.
utility systems. So that might be a more, similar like how we updated the stormwater bylaw. When you get past a certain threshold of development, it triggers different requirements on how you deal with those types of things.
Right. That's a good point, Pat. That's exactly right. The whole concept has to be, the big picture has to be there. It can't be piecemeal. So with that overall vision in place, there has to be a recognition of what will require a special permit. So 80 feet or something else, and that would be either the
I don't know whether
increased size of a particular building or
Yeah.
just the number of buildings. At some point, it might become untenable.
Can I take it back to different points, Bill? I mean, we're trying to create a 3A approved district, right? What's the minimum we have to do to create 3A by giving ourselves the most control of what goes on there? I mean, that's kind of, I think, what we're going for, right? What gives the town the most control, but still meets the requirements of 3A? So isn't that what the question is like, does special permit give us, is it allowed? How much is it allowed by? And does it give us more control over any project that might want to go there?
Yeah, this
This-
district
this-
is outside of 3A.
This is outside of 3A.
It's outside of 3A.
And if it's outside of 3A, I sort of agree with that, which
Yeah.
is that, oh yes, require special permit for the whole shebang.
We
Why
have to
not?
allow something as of right, but we could put, any development over with a footprint over 5,000 square feet, which is the maximum that's allowed for a single building anyway, will require a special permit.
How about just the 80 feet along Walnut and not the L shape along the tracks? Because the other thing you have to take into account, because you've made reference to the parking count, you have to really assess how many square feet you're actually building there. And it's 300, divide that by 300, and that's the number of parking spaces. So there is a relationship about how much parking it will be required for the square footage you have. And I think I did a quick take on just building, because the Crosby's and the Hamilton essentially, Crosby's and the CVS remain essentially the same. You're missing that L that goes from the building from Crosby's to Walnut. You're actually going to replace that with a 2-story construction along Walnut to open up the east end of that parking lot. And in doing that, you're going to actually increase the square footage. So I'm wondering now, how does the parking count compare with the square footage if you were to do just Walnut Street, 2.5 stories, as you have it proposed, and the large buildings in the rear of the lot? So I think that this might be a case where parking really controls how much you can actually do on that site.
That's right. That's right, Emil. And the other thing that the circumstances here are different than what they are on Railroad Avenue. But I think that we can't get stuck on this. There's obviously more work that needs to be done with respect to this. So we should really move on. We can't
But
solve this riddle right now.
I reiterate, there's no limit to how much planning control we can put on this site.
Right. And I think that it's this site as opposed to Railroad Avenue, that's a simpler nut to crack because
Right.
it's built out already. So let's move on, okay?
Okay, what I'm hearing generally is that we want to set the threshold much lower to initiate these conversations more earlier with the development, and that to give the town more control over what's happening on this site.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. And it's why I raised the question. And it's a question and just very quickly about parking. This is not, a fully vetted analysis of how much parking you might
Yes.
need. And you have parking requirements that relate to certain uses that would
Yeah.
make a lot of things infeasible. And that's going to be another point of conversation with any developer who's going to want, who knows, they will know what they need and they will sort of design accordingly. But I think the zoning can't solve all these problems for developers in advance, but what we can do is set that special permit trigger much lower.
I agree with that. Let me just add one final thing on the parking. You are making reference to the existing Hamilton bylaws, though, where it says 300 square feet, which I think is a high number that Hamilton requires for a parking space, 300 square feet for commercial development, which is largely what this will be. Anyway, that's all or one other final note. I do like the railroad concept along Walnut Road, though I think that's a solid concept at least from my standpoint. It's the rest of it. I think, I would agree that a special permit might be the best way to go on everything behind that 80-foot strip along Walnut.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll again, I don't want to hog the entire conversation. It was just an important piece, and we will come back with some proposals for setting that much lower. Okay, I wanted to just make sure we hit on this. It was recommended that we look at the Wenham language for a sunset clause in the zoning, which essentially is a statement that says that if the 3A law becomes inactive or it's been overturned in part, that the zoning bylaw is automatically voided. We've done our best to adapt the language that they have. It would need to be reviewed by council, and I don't know what the state's going to think of it, but one important question here is we've included it for the multifamily overlay district on Asbury. And my question is, would you want this to apply to the 3 affected town center districts that are contributing? So downtown residential, Willow Street, and Bay Road.
What happens if this is not an if this is underlying zoning and it's rescinded? Don't you need some fallback zoning or something?
That's one part of the reason that we didn't include it. That's exactly the point. The other is it's amended in such a manner as to alter the metrics requiring other than 731 units. So, for instance, there's been a recalibration of the regs, or you don't need 730 units, you need 426 now. How do you begin to take that apart? And anyway, it's complicated.
it's complicated. Just a thought, it may not be viable, but could the sunset clause just obliterate the as of right and make any development by special permit?
Marty, I was just going to suggest that. Because 3A focuses on the by right part of all of this.
Right. So that would, in a sense, give the town the rights that it has now under the commercial overlay district, the Willow Street overlay district. They're all development under those bylaws is by special permit. So that might be the fallback.
Well, you do have underlying zoning. You need some zoning that allows something as of right, but I think it would be very difficult to craft a workaround in your town center. I mean, I will point out that those districts, the metrics we've applied to them, bears a lot more resemblance to the metrics that are currently applying to them. In other words, I'm suggesting that maybe you would want to keep them anyway. I mean, there's nothing if the law is overturned, there's nothing to prevent the town from changing their zoning in the future. It's a question of why an automatic kind of rescinding might be required.
Matthew, I'd suggest that because the density you're allowing by right is far beyond what's maybe appropriate for some of those areas. I think
it isn't.
I think by leaving, well, if you do math, right? I mean, it's algebra, right?
Right. A lot of that downtown area is, 8,000 square foot lots. And if you had a 2-family or 3-family house on them instead of a 1-family, you'd meet 3A.
A lot of it is also half-acre lots. A half-acre lot, when you apply 0.4 FAR, that's a big building. That's a little different than it's not all 8,000 square foot lots. It's
I want to bring up what we've talked about at the last meeting, which was I had the question about the Attorney General being able to just delete this section. And in talking, I think Mark answered the thing and said that the Attorney General is able and has at times struck out parts. So basically, I feel like this is a false sense of security if people were to vote on this thinking that this was going to be in place. And then if the Attorney General takes it out, I love the idea of a sunset clause. I just don't know. And then I happened to run into an attorney who actually said that this has happened before where sunset clauses have been taken out of bylaws. I don't have any sightings on that, so I would have to do more research, but it does make me a little nervous on if I knew the sunset clause was going to stay, I might feel different about it, but I'm not convinced that the Attorney General, who is also pushing for compliance with 3A, is going to allow something like this to be taken out. I mean, yeah, to be left in and not taken out. Sorry.
And we haven't consulted with the state on this,
right?
Either.
Well, why don't we put this on hold as well? I don't know that we'll solve this at the moment. It might be that we need to think about this and what its effect is, because if in fact this 3A law were to be amended or changed in any significant way, the planning board has just gone through the process of amending bylaws, and we could do that within a reasonable amount of time. And
can I just make a comment on that, Marnie? So if we do pass 3A, it's a 50% simple majority, 50% plus one. If we are to rescind it ever, it would be a 2/3 majority. So it's very different. There's two different voting things. So once you vote it in, you to repeal it or rescind it, it goes back to the 2/3 to rescind it.
Right, I'm talking about if, for example, there was a determination that the regulations were arbitrary or capricious or anything
Right. I get what
pertinent
you're
to the
saying. I just want
lawsuit.
people,
So,
Right.
so it wouldn't be the town rescinding it. It would be state law nullifying it. So the existing zoning could stay in place until such time as the
But if
planning board amended it.
but if we vote it in willingly, then I think we have to actually rescind it because we're the ones who are saying this is what we want for bylaws. So then I think we would have to vote for a
It
2/3.
would have to be 2/3. You are right on that.
Yeah.
You are right on
Yeah.
that.
That's why I'm wondering what the downside is of having I mean, we're not going to decide tonight, but what's the downside of having a sunset clause? It only protects us, and if we don't have one, it takes it
There's
away.
no
Yeah.
downside. There's no downside because if the attorney general strikes it, we've lost nothing. So
Well, the
put it in and
downside
see
is-
what she does.
The
The
downside
downside-
is people that are anti 3A may see this as a saving grace when it's really not.
Right. They may not realize that the attorney general could strike it and they might vote for it, thinking it's a compromise, and then not realize that we need a 2/3 majority to rescind it.
But if
So I think that's like
the Attorney
technically
General were to strike
in
the
there.
language, it would go back to the town, notifying them that they're striking the language and require them to modify the language, which would then require another town meeting vote to change the bylaw. It wouldn't just become effective, it would be void until it's a valid bylaw. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I would want to see something more in writing. And I'm not saying you're not right, Tom. it's very,
Yeah, it should go through town council or whatever
Yeah.
to confirm, but that's my
Right. I don't think we're going to resolve this
Yeah,
tonight.
got it.
I mean,
Moving on.
it's a little intractable. So it's something we need to look at. And I think that town council who might have more experience with these sunset clauses can weigh in on this because eventually town council is going to have to look at all these things. So let's move on. Matt?
Yes, I think maybe this is the time to come back to some of the other questions. Marnie, you raised a question at the outset, and maybe open the floor and see if other people have had the chance to review the second draft, or maybe bring up some questions while we're all together.
Well, I'm going to start the ball rolling because if everyone can look at their proposed amendments to the existing code, I had some questions as to the numbering of these proposed districts. So right now, the commercial overlay district is section 9.6. Now the commercial overlay district isn't going away because we have a commercial overlay district, I believe, at the end of Chabaco Road. So that commercial overlay district has to remain in place. It may need to be modified to indicate that it's no longer applicable to the town center, but it has to stay in place, which means the numbering of the 3A multifamily overlay district has to be changed to 9.7. And then the Hamilton Town Center base coding conceivably could be section 9.8, but all those bylaws in section 9 are overlay districts, and the Hamilton Town Center base zoning is not an overlay district. So it could conceivably be section 8.4. I'm not recommending that. We would have to then amend the caption to section 8, which is now special residential districts, to include commercial districts. But again, there is definitely a numbering issue there. And then on page 3 of 11, in the proposed amendments to the existing code, there's some numbering issues because you failed to take into account section 9.3, which is the Conservancy Overlay District. that district has been deleted, but the numbering has stayed the same. So section 9.4 is the estate overlay district, and section 9.5 is the Willow Street overlay district, which is being eliminated. And then in terms of the table of use regulations, I appreciated what you did here, and I'm going to just suggest that wherever the ZBA appears, it should be the planning board who is the special permit granting authority, except maybe with respect to accessory uses. Having said that, there are some uses that I think should be amended or eliminated. So for example, on page 6 of 11, B4 hospital medical clinic, the ZBA is listed as the special permit granting authority for the Bay Road Civic District. I think that that Bay Road Civic District is going to stay the same and have a civic use. So I would think no should be there. And the same for section B5, community or private club. That would be under the Bay Road Civic District. And then municipal buildings, there should really be a no, except for the Bay Road Civic District. I mean, I don't think we want municipal districts, municipal buildings rather, in any district other than where those civic buildings are now. And then going down to agricultural, we have C2, C3, gardens, riding stables, the keeping of poultry, horses or cows. In all those districts, it just should be a no. We're trying to promote commercial development, not farms in our downtown. Much as I love farms and especially horses, I think that those are uses that we don't want to countenance. And similarly in commercial, D5 kennels, I don't think we want them in our downtown. And I also don't think that we want garages with more than 4 automobile or truck spaces. If what is meant by that is like gas stations with garages. I'm not sure what's meant there, but I thought that's a no. And the same with motor vehicle repair shops and fast food restaurants. They're all no in my world. And anybody who wants can tell me I'm wrong. And then going down to D22, drive-in or drive-through establishments. I don't think that we want them in our downtown. And then under the, and this is tricky because the Attorney General has to weigh in, but at town meeting, the zoning amendments that the planning board proposed, particularly those with respect to accessory uses, were adopted. And so the Attorney General has to weigh in on that, but it seems pretty anomalous to have a conversion for temporary living spaces that was deleted. And now instead of accessory apartment, we have a special bylaw for ADUs. So those issues have to be addressed some way or another. And then
Marnie, did you give all these comments? I think we all provided very similar.
no, these are comments to the revised draft. I
Comments to the
already gave
revised draft.
comments to the first draft.
Okay, because I think I made similar comment. We hadn't seen each other's comments. We only made our comments independently and then saw the draft update. And it would be helpful, I think, when
I
there's a
have to
draft.
apologize.
Yeah.
I didn't go through the table of use regulations as critically as I have now.
But I think it might have been helpful if and I don't know, Matthew, if this is possible with the draft update to give a summary of all the comments you received from all the individuals, so we could all see what each other had proposed, and then whether or not they were considered in reference to where they were applied, and if they weren't, then to comment as to why.
The
So
comments.
just can I finish though with respect to these proposed amendments, because they're, in a sense, they're substantive, but they're also procedural, if you will. So on page 11 of 11, you have 9.4 Willow Street overlay as being eliminated, and that section number is actually 9.5. So I can provide all these comments. And Pat, we didn't have these proposed amendments to the existing code. The first draft was very cursory. It's a second draft that has much more detail in it. So that's why I have gone through that. This is much more detailed than the first one. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to comment on it to the extent I just did. So did anyone else have any proposed comments to this second draft of the proposed amendment to the existing code?
And mine were just basically in reference to what I mentioned. I think there's a lot of comments that were made, and maybe just just some exposure to what they were, and then.
Pat,
Yeah.
the comments were consolidated, and there is I believe, available a very messy sort of tracked changes document that captures a lot of those things.
I can provide these, but I think the planning board really needs to look at some of those uses, because I would hope that both the select board and the planning board would agree with me, for example, that we don't want riding stables and hay, fodder, and silage woodlots in our downtown, or the keeping of cows and kennels and that type of thing. Or fast food restaurants. I think those are pretty straightforward, and I think I can provide.
I thought the
My
materials
version.
section. I thought the materials section needed a lot of work. There's a lot of opportunities to build sustainably, and there's an opportunity to require that within
Actually,
the
Pat,
bylaw here.
if you read the 3A regulations, they are in some sense appalling, because they actually provide that you can't do those things because it would make the building of the 3A housing too expensive. It's right in the regulation.
But they allow, this is what I got from the legislators meeting I was at, and they do allow some flexibility in the materials section
Yeah,
of
well,
the code. So I think there's some opportunity there in the
Yeah, that's
materials
worth a
section.
try.
we should
Yeah.
do that. Whatever is
Yeah.
allowable, we should push for. And to that point, I'm going to jump way ahead, but the section on lighting, we should require dark sky compliance and shielded lights. And so the lighting section of the town center based zoning was fairly light, I thought, in terms of what was required.
Are we offering final comments now on the overall draft? Or are we still on the proposed amendments to the existing code?
No, I finished on the proposed amendment. So if anybody else has any comments with respect to that, if not, we can move on to the actual town center based
Okay.
zoning. And with respect to that, and I hate to monopolize the discussion here, but I had two points. One, the first, and I know Emil will probably elaborate on this. I think it should be crystal clear that any non-conforming structures or uses are grandfathered in, and we have to be really clear as to what changes to either the use or the structure in terms of additions or demolition and addition, whatever might be a change that would trigger the application of this town center zoning. And right now that's not entirely clear. And then I also thought that the administration section 9.7.7 was really pretty light. And we do have to think about making reference to the issuance of regulations to help applicants interpret the metrics in this form-based code. And also whatever application requirements we might want to impose so that we can actually apply the metrics. So does anyone want to expand on those two things? And I think, Jonathan, you were making this point, but probably can do it in a better way than I can with respect to that.
You were referring to applicability, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So I think, oh, Matt's back. Okay. what I had mentioned before was both from an educational point of view for an applicant and also to create legal clarity, it would be helpful to define or point somebody to a reference standard such as the building code to define when the form-based code kicks in. You know, what amount of redevelopment? Is it 50% of market value? You know, that's the building code. And there's multiple reasons for doing that. You know, number one, you want to be transparent. You want to have folks be allayed in writing that this isn't any sort of a taking and that it's only major redevelopment, but what's the metric that triggers it? And then the other thing that I run into in my work is folks ask me, okay, well, if it's 50, this often happens with FEMA regs. Okay, if it's 50% of market value, they say, okay, let's do one phase this year and another phase next year and another phase the third year, and we'll end up at 80% investment over market value, but we won't trigger FEMA. And that's not the intent here. And, you know, that's going to aggravate the building inspector. So just a little bit of clarity on what this, what triggers the form-based code, I think would be helpful at the beginning of the code, just to help folks be guided through it.
Well, I think, Jonathan, to your point, it would be 9.7.1.3, somewhere in there. There's a temporal applicant, a territorial application, but there's also a temporal application. So there's existing uses and structures, and then what happens with the additions to those buildings. So I think that's a really important point.
There's some language in your existing code about these triggers and thresholds. I think they're largely there because so much of the town is already non-conforming. What I can do is I will start there and see.
That would be section 5 of our zoning bylaws.
I will start there and see what that looks like, and then I hear what you're asking for now. I was not totally clear about it earlier, but this makes sense.
I think in section 5, there's no reference to any kind of percentage of change to an existing structure. It's just it's more generalized than that.
Yeah, I would like to support that. This was the single biggest issue for me in the code that's drafted, and it is that, and this is probably the most of most importance to people who are going to be looking at it, that non-conforming uses and non-conforming structures are two different things, because you could go through a change in use, you can have an abandonment or discontinuance of a particular use, and then what happens to the building, to the site, and so forth, or damage or destruction, and that occurs also with the structure. And if a building is in non-compliance, and say you want to put an addition on the structure, do you bring the structure into more non-compliance, or do you have to remedy that? Any addition you put on has to bring it closer to. I mean, all those things are really. It's not an easy. It's not a one-page, to me anyway, solution on this. And I think it's going to be important to really clarify that. The other thing I'm offering, and I don't know what in your experience, but have you ever put in a special exceptions clause? In other words, I think in a lot of cases, it's good to have a safety valve. In other words, if you, beginning with a pre-application conference, but in the event that there is, because developers have the right to submit whatever they like, in terms of a proposal for review, but in the event there is a special exception that could potentially bring a lot of benefits to the community, that would allow a little bit more deliberation on a special permit, either anywhere in the downtown or in specific areas, that might have some value, going through a particular process, starting with contacting Mark Connors, for example, and then going to the planning board and have public hearings and so forth. So that's something I wonder if you folks had any experience with having that sort of safety valve put in your code.
Honestly, not that I can recall, but I'm happy to look into it. And it is
Just to see if it has any merit, so that we're not locked into something that if something were to develop and you would see something happen that, there isn't sufficient time to change the code or whatever, that this is something that can be abused. So it's not something that would be normal by any means, but really an exception and a special exception in this case.
I think in the 3A districts, we will have to be careful not to get our wires crossed, right?
Yeah.
That you're limiting as of right. But
Yeah.
There's certainly areas outside that we could look at doing that.
Okay.
I don't recall us including it in previous districts that we've worked on recently, but
yeah,
I'm happy to look into it.
Did anyone else have any comments on the town center based zoning? Okay, so I'll go through my less substantive but cumulatively important issues. So first off, let's spell multifamily with a hyphen. The executive office does that, and I think we should too. So sometimes it's all one word and sometimes it has a hyphen. Let's use the hyphen. There's also reference in the town center-based zoning to this article. Article is not used in our zoning bylaw. We refer to a section, so that should be replaced. There is also one and only one reference that I found to the form-based code, and I don't know if we're using that terminology, but think about that. And then I've stumbled over this, and I should have brought it to your attention in the first draft, and that is the reference to foot plates. That is not defined, and I think you really are referring to the footprints of buildings. So that was something I stumbled over, and if I stumbled over it, I'm sure that the public will stumble over it too. I did have some stylistic changes, but I can bring them to Mark's attention, and then he can deliver that to you. But on page 14 and 15 of 24, there are notes in the charts, but I was not able to find note 2 in the dimensional standards. And then on pages 16 and 17, I don't think I was able to find note 3. So I think those charts have to be proofread a little more carefully. And then finally, section 9.7.5, the use provisions. This whole section is not set up the way it would need to be set up to actually be integrated into our zoning bylaw. So I just bring that to your attention. I didn't try and address that for this evening. And I think that might be all I have. I mentioned the lighting and the dark sky compliance. We don't see stars too often in our area. I think I saw some Monday night, but I think we need to make that a little more stringent. And then again, the administration in 9.7.7, Emil mentioned the safety valve that could probably go here, as well as a reference to the planning board promulgating regulations to govern application requirements and anything else that we might want to add there. So
I want to pause on that for a second. You have a whole very involved section about procedures and administration relative to the planning board. Is it appropriate that there be some additional separate language in this section?
Well, I didn't really think about that too much, but we did amend our site plan review bylaw 10.6. So we could incorporate that, excuse me, by reference. It's mentioned, but we could make it more specific.
I can work with you, Matt. We can take I think it might be helpful just to take the existing zoning bylaw and kind of take the entire bylaw and pluck in the additions you want to make. And I think that would draw attention to others might need to make some amendments too. So that might be helpful.
Right.
Yeah, our instinct just on that one, our instinct was to obviously not reinvent your planning board procedures or submission requirements just for this particular section, but to defer to that other section. So
I think it just needs to be more explicit that the provisions of those sections would apply. And it might, we would have to look at those requirements and make sure they comport with what we're intending here. But Mark, maybe you could assist with that.
Sure.
And then did any of the planning board members have any comments with respect to the 3A multifamily overlay district?
I have a question. Actually for the select board. I don't know if now is the appropriate time, Marnie. They
Well,
had
I want to finish up
executive-
kind of the specifics, and
they
then
had
we
an
can look
executive
at
session?
the big
Okay,
picture. So unless someone has
general. Okay, great.
comments about
All right,
the,
I didn't know what the time.
well, unless we have, anyone had specific comments with respect to the overlay district on Asbury, then we can look at the big picture. If you had questions about that. Beth, go ahead.
Well, and also I think
You're breaking up.
I thought that maybe that would oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Hold on, I'm gonna move. Actually, all right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I think you should start over
Okay,
because you were breaking up.
Okay, well, I'm just going to talk about when you just brought up the Asbury. I didn't know if that would be impacted by the Gordon Conwell. I don't want to get stuck there though. I know that the select board had a meeting with the attorney to discuss an executive session, what action they might take. I don't know if that was ever shared with the public. I had asked the select board to seek an unfunded mandate determination because in that there's also there's two things. They say whether it's an unfunded mandate, but the more important part is they also come up with a financial impact statement for each town based on at least no less than 3 years of the financial impact. And to me, it doesn't make sense that the state could take action against a town if we're waiting for the state auditor to give us that financial impact. And I feel like that's an important thing for us to have before we move forward. And I would feel better not just having our own financial impact statement and understanding it, but also from the state. So I don't.
Beth, I can answer that for you. This is
That's
Bill.
great. Yep.
Yeah, so we voted to do a dual path, just like
Yep.
Wyndham did, right? So we are developing the 3A, scheduling a special town meeting to review the 3A, as well as we are talking to our attorneys about and looking at drafts right now of a similar Wyndham, different from Wyndham, but similar to Wyndham. So it's a dual, we're on a dual parallel path. It happened at the same time frame. We will decide before June 26th if we want to push off our meeting. But at this point, the June 26th meeting is still on, but it's an option that we might push it off. But that's right now we're scheduled for we're meeting next week to discuss the Wenham suit and what our options are to that on our next meeting. But at this point, we're on the dual path process.
Okay, that's very interesting because I did look at the Essex Superior Court complaint, and Wenham has also filed a motion for a preliminary injunction. And in that motion for a preliminary injunction, they do reference the towns that have filed similar lawsuits. Some of the towns have actually joined together, and I don't know if it's an option to tag along with Wenham or not. That's not for tonight. But
Their suit's a little different than ours, so we had not tagged along, but we will have a public meeting on that on Monday and welcome any comments to that approach.
So Hanson, Holden, Middleton, Rentham, Duxbury, which happens to be where John Whitten lives, and Weston have all commenced actions. And just to your point, Beth, about the fiscal impacts, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities has stated that there are no fiscal.
So has there not been any small business impact statement? That was another thing in the Milton case. They had to re-promulgate the guidelines, and then they also needed do we know if there has been filed a small business impact statement? Because if not, I don't think that the current guidelines are in effect.
What my understanding is, and I believe I read this on the Commonwealth's website, that the Executive Office said there are no fiscal. So they didn't do one because there are none, and it's few.
Okay, and then I just had a couple other things I just wanted to highlight as we're thinking about this, especially since Bill's talked about they're going to be discussing this. I just want to reiterate that Hamilton has only ever received $28,000 from any of these grants, and we could potentially have millions of dollars of impact annually. So I bring that up because it's worth spending a good chunk of change to potentially, and I'm not saying we wouldn't actively try to do some other things for zoning. It's just, I'm not sure that this is the best way to go about it. And so it may be worthwhile for us to spend $100,000. I also ran into someone who was saying that the people who are fighting with the state or suing the state have been getting better deals because they have some negotiation room left. Because if we vote it in, we give up pretty much our negotiation opportunities, or the states are less likely to negotiate. So I'm not saying we want to negotiate and get, how we want to land on that, but I just wanted to share that. And then the other thing that came up, I was at a meeting and someone ended up sharing about something completely different, that by giving up control and taking away special permit for this, 731 units could be built as of right at any point in time. And maybe it won't be built all at once, but the impact on public safety was really explained on how they have running cards. The fire departments all work together. So every time you have any kind of substantial change in housing, everybody has to recalculate. And so if you have our town doing it and there was a lot happening, and then other towns, I just wanted us to know that because I had never heard about that public safety aspect and what it looks like for them. So it might be helpful for us to chat with either the fire chief and or the police chief about, like, if that was all built at once, how would that impact the fire and public safety. So I just wanted to share a few things. Thanks.
I think this has been constructive. I'm glad that the select board is being wise and pursuing a dual track. It's certainly probably warranted given the uncertainty. There's less uncertainty, but there still remains uncertainty with respect to the regulations, not the law itself, but the actual regulations. So do any members of the select board have any comments that they would like to make because if not, I would like to move on to another topic, because by my watch, it's 8:45.
So I had a question for you, Teal. General question, Marnie. Is that still a good time for that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
What percent? It looks like you all are pretty much kind of in the home stretch on this. What percent complete are you all with your scope of work?
90.
Okay, thanks. That's it. Thank you.
That's a
Anyone
guess.
else? Okay, so I want to turn just for a very, very few minutes, and I'm taking this out of order so that the select board members can leave the meeting when we turn to minutes and our board reorganization. But I was interested in getting an update on the development agreement between the town and Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And I would like that update because Merwin Walters reached out to me, and it appears that the seminary has proposed a draft overlay district, and he thought it would be a great idea if I met with him and went over this overlay district and provided him with some thoughts. Now, what I told him was that I would never do such a thing unless I ran it by the planning board. And of course, anything that I said, and or if it was appropriate to bring our present vice chair or secretary with me, anything we were to say, or if whatever we learned, but whatever we were to say in response would be non-binding and informal. But I did want to know if the development agreement was in final form. And I'll just provide some background and refresher for everyone here. So on December 19th, 2023, which is almost a year and a half ago, the planning board paused its work on the Browns Hill Overlay District so that a development agreement could be crafted between the town and the seminary. And apparently the last draft was dated March 6th, 2025, and Carolyn Beaulieu provided me with a copy of that, and I did have some comments, and I know that other members of the select board had comments to that, and I don't know if there have been any further developments with respect to finalizing that document, because I think it's important that the planning board, if it's to consider whatever overlay district that the seminary is proposing, that we know the parameters of that development agreement.
So you want to, so you ready for me? Or you got more questions?
Yeah, no, that's it. I just wanted to know where we are.
So we got comments that it's like we're making comments back. Rosie has been our liaison with that group, so she's the first one to respond to comments, and she has the most details. I don't know if Rosie you want to speak to, but so Rosie's comments have gone back through John Whitten to Merwin, and we don't have any updates from that sort of negotiation, but we were given an agreement. We have comments on it, and those comments have now gone back in partial form to Merwin, and we'll talk about that as we get their comments back. But so I don't have a great answer for you, but it's moving forward, which is the good news, but we're not there yet.
Not there yet. Okay. So if the only thing that I would ask the planning board is to authorize me, and if they think it appropriate, that I'm accompanied by another planning board member to speak informally with Merwin Walters and see what he is proposing. And clearly the draft overlay district that the seminary has developed is much different than what the planning board proposed, and obviously it's based on a different set of maps and that type of thing. So I would entertain, well, actually I should probably wait to entertain a motion until we have completed our board reorganization so that we know who can speak with Merwin Walters. But with that said, if the select board members want to retire for the evening,
Marty,
we don't
excuse
have any
me.
further.
Marty, Joe has a question.
Oh, sure.
Joe, he raised his hand.
Can you?
Hold on, I can't even find myself right now. Hold on. Actually, I think I put that up to by accident. I was trying to do something else. Let me lower my hand. Apologize.
Okay. So you had nothing to add. So thanks. But so I don't know.
I mean, I would say that I think that, you know, as you pointed out a couple times, Marty, you know, the development agreement and the overlay are going to go hand in hand.
Right.
And I think it would, you know, from my perspective, not asking you to do anything or directing or anything like that, but just an observation on my part, it might be helpful for you or somebody from the planning board to meet with Merwin and get some sense of what direction their overlay district's going in, to see if they're trying to address some of the comments that we're making about the DA in the overlay district. And if they are, then maybe it's less that we have to negotiate on the development agreement. I haven't been shared the draft to the overlay district yet. So it's just a thought that since they go hand in hand, you have the latest version minus some of the comments from the select board, but you have the most up-to-date version that was public about the development agreement. So you might be in a good position to help us figure out if there's more that can be done in the DA.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. But I as I emphasized to him, you know, full transparency to the planning board and now with the select board. But I'm, you know, have no intention of attempting to bind anybody with any discussions that we would have. The deal's made when the documents are signed.
Do we think that Gordon Conwell intends to drop a full-blown development agreement and bylaw in our laps?
Well,
without any negotiation in advance? Just, you know,
well, here's the thing.
do.
Here's the thing, Bill. At one of the select board meetings, I made the comment that we, as a planning board, spent a considerable amount of time on our overlay district, and as Carolyn Beaulieu said, the seminary bled all over it with their red line comments. So I suggested that rather than have the planning board be the drafter of the overlay district and have the seminary criticize it, that we might flip that scenario and have the seminary come up with a draft so that the planning board would be in a position to evaluate it. Because certainly that our version of the overlay district was not met with applause. So we'll see what they come up with and whether that is something that the planning board would be willing to countenance. And we have to remember that there are aspects to any overlay district that could have substantial benefit to the town. So if the 208 apartments were to be on the subsidized housing inventory, then we would have satisfied, at least in the short term, our responsibilities for 10% affordability. That might not last forever, but it would at least buy us some time and give us an upper hand with respect to potential 40B development. So,
okay.
Anything else?
Before we move on, Mary, do we want to accept limited public comments, or do you want to defer to the public?
Very brief, because of the hour and the fact that the planning board has other business. So,
just before, I think it sounds like we're gonna. So you're almost done with the select board, and before we go to public comment.
But I don't know who has public comment.
Can I ask one question?
Oh, sure,
I know just sort of it's a bit out of step, and it sounds like based on how far along this process is, and it's on a good trajectory as well. But sort of, I don't know if it came up even in the scoping process for this as UTL was being brought on board. But did we look at community benefit entitlement program types of approaches, and was that something that's been considered, or has it been? And it may not necessarily even apply here in Massachusetts too frequently. But it's something that's been looked at as far as different ladders in terms of development densities as related to 3A, or as related to kind of a new baseline for the form-based code, or how how we might kind of have additional controls put in place where we're trying to incentivize developers to provide community benefits and go through an entitlements process before being allowed to kind of move on to permit-based process. Has that been considered at all? Is it something that we could consider if we're taking an iteration?
The answer is, in a sense, no. But the metrics that are set forth in UTIL's town-based, town center-based zoning has those controls.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, they're for non-architects, planning professionals, and I would put myself in that category. It's difficult to discern how those controls work, but they do work. I mean, between the height and whatnot, and the setbacks and the floor area ratio, they constrain the size of buildings and also the density.
Yeah, I'm thinking kind of like, some of Beth's comments as well around, and part of it is like having the control in terms of what ultimately gets built, but also opportunities to minimize any cost risks that could be incurred by town. And that's sort of sometimes what a community benefits entitlements program approach can offer. And it's something that we could, if there's another cut on this later on, I think it's something to be considered. But it doesn't have to be now.
It's not something that's been explored. I mean, and Joe could potentially speak to that, but it's not something that the planning board is aware of at this point.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, if we do another cut on this, I think it's something that we can consider on version 2.
I'll just quickly add that the 3A imposes limitations on what the town can ask of development. We are allowed to ask for require up to 10% affordable units in new developments, and so that's been added. That's actually less than your underlying zoning for multifamily, which is 1 for the first 10 and 7 for every 10 thereafter. So we modified that, but we've retained that at 10%. But otherwise, they do allow, for instance, as long as you're meeting base requirements, that you could offer bonuses of some sort, right? Either height or density in exchange for other community benefits. But in general, the 3A requirements are pretty restrictive on that.
So basically, they're setting the floor at that top level already.
Yes.
We can't set a floor and then have bonuses that get them up to that level.
No, exactly.
Okay.
So,
All right.
Matt, I think at the last meeting you had said there is an opportunity to petition the EOHLC, but we just don't have time to do that. But if we had more time, we could petition it so that it is the same as what we have in our current bylaws. Is that
That's
correct?
right. Yeah, they require someone do an economic analysis to ensure that it isn't an ask that will be infeasible economically. And I think some communities have done this, and I think you can go up to 20%. Again, if you do this study to demonstrate that it doesn't
Right.
hinder development. I think I see no reason why not that the town could elect to do that study in the future and modify the requirements accordingly.
So can I ask what the state wants us to do in terms of downtown sewage? I mean, there are many, many options. We could form a sewage district and charge the developers for it. We could foot the bill ourselves and add, numerous points onto our tax rate. We could apply for state grants. So is that, also limited?
Or do nothing, Bill, and limit the development of having no sewer. So, I mean, we're not required to have a sewer.
No, we're not required to have a sewer.
I think there is some, I just want to speak on the sewer thing. I do think we can say that, but I have heard, especially there was something else, maybe like 40R or something, where originally they said we weren't required to do certain things. And then towns that adopted it did have responsibilities. So I would want to get clarification to make sure that we're not gonna end up having more things. And then just back to Matt, what you said, if I'm not sure we could do it retroactively without doing it the 2/3 majority. If we went to the state, we probably would have to have that 2/3 majority. So the easier thing was going to be if we did it in the first round, probably.
Yeah. And that's probably a very good point. You clearly thought about it more than I
I'm
have.
just trying to process it all.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
in a whole different world. I'm like trying to think it all through.
I'm not sure there's any, I'm not aware of any community that has yet even had the chance to amend a 3A district and what that process looks like. But I'm just saying hypothetically, you know.
Yep. No, that was
maybe
helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, so public comment, and then we can adjourn the select board meeting.
So if you could raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment.
Kathleen?
You have to unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Matt and Zoe from UTL for doing an excellent job developing a plan for the town to come into compliance with 3A and giving us a form-based code that fits the character of the town. And thanks to the planning board for their thoughtful comments and these productive discussions. I look forward to voting in support of Hamilton doing its part to help alleviate the housing crisis in the state. I just want to say that I would not support spending any additional time or effort considering filing a suit in Superior Court to delay our compliance. I do not think that is a worthwhile use of taxpayer funds. Thank you.
Any other comments? Bill, did you want to entertain a motion to close your meeting?
Yeah, can I have a motion to adjourn the select board meeting?
Motion to adjourn select board meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Bill Wilson. We'll do a roll call vote. I will start with Bill Wilson.
Bill Wilson, yes.
Rosemary Kennedy.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Ben.
Ben Galuza, aye.
And Tom.
Tom Myers, aye.
And Wilson, aye. Thank you very much. Great discussion.
Good night,
Appreciate all the
everyone.
hard work.
Yep. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's just us. Shall we consider the minutes from March 12th, 2025?
Yes. I had a couple of comments on them.
Right.
Go ahead. So it said that Matt Hamill attended something, but he it should be Pat Norton.
Yeah.
And then I didn't
I can't
know
move.
if we wanted to add any more of Jonathan's the backstory on the GPOD to the minutes. I feel like Jonathan shared some good information that might be good to memorialize. I think that was the meeting. Was that the meeting you shared, Jonathan?
I don't really recall which meeting it was.
No, I don't either.
I shared it a number of times with the planning board, so.
I'm pretty sure because that was the meeting where Rick and Mitchell and Mark Johnson were there. I think we had talked about it because it was the hearing. So for me, that would be helpful, but you know, however you guys want to do that.
Here's the way we're going to play this, Beth. If you want
me to write it,
you go listen to the YouTube, watch the YouTube video, find the language and send it to me. Okay?
I love that. I listen to them often, so perfect.
Okay.
In any case, the GPOD language passed in town vote.
So it passed.
It did.
So
I just thought it
Here's
was
what Jonathan
helpful.
said. I'm just kidding.
The little bit of history I felt like was helpful.
It was.
Okay, so you send that to me.
I will. I'm on it, Marnie.
Okay, and then I noticed that in the public hearing, item 2, the one, fifth line down, it said that article is proposed from the warrant. And so that need to be corrected. It should be that article is to be withdrawn from the warrant. And then Darcy recognized that Rick Mitchell lives on Rock Maple, not Maple Rock. And then in that same paragraph, 6th line down, the phrase reads, Hamilton needs to expand its tax base. And it should read, as it needs more housing, not end. So there were those 4 items, and then Beth is going to provide some additional language. So I'll hold on to this draft, and Beth, when I get your language, I'll make all these changes and then forward the final version to
Sounds good. Thank you.
to Mark. Okay, so the last item on our agenda before we can call it a wrap is the annual planning board reorganization, and that happens every year after a town election. So I congratulate all the planning board members who were reelected. They beat their opponents blank. Blank.
It was tough.
It was a tough fight, and you prevailed. So congratulations on that. So we now have to elect a chair and a secretary or a vice chair. And
I
once we-
nominate Marnie Crouch for chair.
I second that.
So any discussion? Is there anyone who'd like to be chair other than me? It pays to be retired, right? So I accept your voice of confidence. I will not vote, but we'll have a roll call vote. So when I call your name, please indicate whether you want to be saddled with me for another year. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Herr, aye.
and Darcy Dale.
Darcy Dale, aye.
And so now I will entertain a motion to approve a vice chair.
I move that we have Emil be the vice chair again.
Do I have a second?
I second that.
Okay, a roll call vote. Emil, will you accept this important job?
Well, I'll think about it, but yes, of course I will. Yeah.
Can we make a contingency on the length of presentations to be limited to 15 slides?
You can put a limit on a number of PowerPoints per year. You can do that.
Okay, Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Herr, aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
Marnie Crouch, aye. So it's unanimous. So that's great.
One
Okay,
abstention. One abstention.
One abstention. So the last item then is whether you would authorize me, and I would actually like to invite Emil to attend this meeting with Merwin Walters with me. I think it's always important to have 2 sets of ears listening to what's being said so that there's no confusion at any point about that. So if you think it's a good idea to meet with him and just kind of get a lay of the land, because the seminary doesn't move expeditiously.
No.
I think we can agree on that. And I'd like to see where they're going with all this and whether they've thought about some things. And I just don't know. And so it's kind of an opportunity to understand what they're thinking and see how it relates to what the work product that we had done.
I would support this effort. The question is, do we need to make a motion and vote?
I think we should.
Okay, then I make a motion that Marnie and Emil attend a meeting with Myron and then report back to the planning board what's being discussed and
Second.
presented.
Second.
Any discussion? And I will just reiterate that I have no intention of binding the planning board to anything with respect to what the seminary is proposing. We need full transparency, and the whole board needs to understand what it is and vote on it. So, if there's no other discussion, we'll take a roll call vote. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Her,
Beth Her, aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So now we just have one thing left to do. Darcy,
I make a motion that we adjourn for the evening.
do I have a second?
Second.
At 9:12, I'll take a roll call vote. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Her,
Aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night,
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.